Welcome to the EZCODE Projects Series Maze video number 4. If you have not done so already, please complete the previous EZCODE Projects Maze Series videos. For those of you that have done so, let's begin. Open the Maze Project directory in VS Code. I'll open up VS Code, open the Explorer window, open folder. I keep mine in Projects. EZCode, there's the maze directory open. Okay, open the code.js file in VS Code. I'll just select this right here, and there we go. In the last video, we built the borders to our matrix, as well as unique cell identifiers. In this video, we will focus on the maze logic. Let's revisit Eller's algorithm. In the sample run, step 5a, so down here we're a sample run 5a, the specification states that the old row is the current row. So right here it's just explaining that, meaning that after the first row iteration, the second row will be initially built off the previous row's values. So by using the previous row, the generator can understand where the bottom borders are and account for that logic in the next row. That's how the algorithm builds on itself with its own self-contained memory. So just to clarify, here we have the first row would go through and do the right walls and the bottom walls, and then that row would be copied into the next one. So we would start with asking questions of whether there's a bottom row on the current row we're going to build, and if there is, the set number would be the same. So that's the reason why we have to do it this way. So let's go back to the code.js file. So we'll just close this out, go back to the code.js file, and let's look at what we're doing here. Currently, our column divs right here, the loop has no way to utilize the previous row, nor can it examine the next column to reassign the unique set number when determining the random right wall assignment. This may all sound a bit confusing at first, but we're going to go over this. So here we are building an array from columns, which really give, it's just a count. So we know that columns, let's say here is columns is 8, so 8 times we're going to get undefined here, which we're not using. We're just using it as a counter to do something 8 times. And as we're looking through this, we can see that if it's on the first portion of the 8, so on, let's just say it's on the first one, number 1, the first time it's running through this, how can it look at the second time that it ran through that? It hasn't built it yet. So that's how it can't look ahead and say, what's your set number? Because it's just not there yet. It's not built. And also, how would we look at the previous row? That also will not be built until this map function is completed 8 times, and then we'll get column divs. This will become something. And we're not passing that in anywhere here. So we can't say, inside the map, we can't say, hey, column div, because it doesn't exist yet until the end. So this isn't going to work the current way that we have this. So it seems like we need to refactor our code a bit to first build the columns of the row and then use them. So let's refactor our maze generator function to prepare for more logic. Remember, just type as I do. Pause the video or slow down the speed when needed. Understanding comes later. Let's begin. Let's start with the way that will give us access to the previous row. Okay, so what we can do is we're going to start by changing what this is going to be. So we got to kind of have to refactor our loop here. So I'm on line 33 here, and instead of assigning this value as a constant, as a const here, meaning that the compiler currently the column divs were saying, hey, this doesn't change. Don't worry about it after it's created. We need the compiler to worry about it. So that's what the let keyword is for. So we're going to say let instead of const, and let is going to, same thing, we're declaring a variable. Now we get to name the variable. I'm going to name it row because that's what it is. And that's the left-hand assignment. It's going to equal the right-hand assignment. And what that means here is row is currently nothing because the loop hasn't started. So I want to give it a value, a starting value, and I'm going to use the word null. This is a reserved word in JavaScript and in many programming languages, and it means nothing. It actually means nothing. Hey, this is a placeholder. It has no meaningful value. It's null, purposely set. So we have this row, it's going to be null. And then while we're at it, because we're kind of making a lot of row words around here, let's change up some of these words. So instead of maze rows, let's just change that to maze. And if you remember, we've declared it here, and you can see it's gone dim, and that means it can't be found in the page. No one's using this maze right now because we changed it. So we have to go back down here and say, oh, that's where we changed it. So let's just make that maze on the console log there, and we'll make this maze. And now we've at least corrected our errors that we introduced. And also looking at this, yep, that looks like okay. So let's go ahead and start by creating a new function that'll take care of the creation of each row that will also allow us to pass in the previous row. So we're just going to say, hey, you know what kind of like a wish list. What would we want right now? And let's go back up here. We need to add a function in here. So I'm going to get rid of line 32 here just to keep these two things together. And right below that, we'll open up a new line and a space, and we're going to say, we're going to use the variable that we just declared up there. So it's going to be row. And now we're going to reassign it. We're going to say, okay, row, I know you're null, but after this function runs, you're going to be something new. And what you're going to be is, let's just make this up. We're going to create a row, and we need to pass in a few things to help create the row. The first argument here is going to be row, and then the next one is going to be the row index, and then the row array again. So we're going to see what those mean. We haven't created this function, but we're going to soon. So in preparing for that, just understand that this row, we're talking about this let row up here. So it comes in the loop, this loop is going to run, and the first row, it passes in. Well, one thing we have to take care of, because now actually we have another issue we have to deal with. We've declared a variable row here, and inside of this loop, inside of this scope, these brackets, there's also another row, which we don't want. So we have too many rows going on, just like the maze rows, this rows, that row. So let's change this up a bit, because when this array runs, we're really using this as a counter. So it's going to count 8 times currently, because rows is assigned 8 up here. And what that is really just doing, if you recall, is it was just an array of undefined 8 times. So it's not really anything meaningful that we need to name and use. But if I got rid of row here, if I just deleted it and used row index and row array, map doesn't know. It doesn't know what I've called these. It knows it's going to send me 3 arguments. The first one's going to be the item of the array, in which case it's going to be undefined. The second argument is going to be row index, and the third will always be the row array. That's always the way it is with the map function that JavaScript gives us. So by eliminating the row there, even though I have it labeled row index, this is actually going to be the value undefined, and row array would turn into the row index, and then we wouldn't be using the row array. So we need a spacer, a way to put something there and the way I've decided to do it is I'm going to put exactly what it is and what I'm using it for, and that is nothing. So I'm just going to use that as a spacer so I can still grab a hold of the row index and row array. You can name your variable whatever you'd like here. And I'm going to continue with mine as nothing. It's very descriptive on exactly what we're going to do with it. So we have not created the create row function yet. So now that we've done this part, let's just go over really quick again. The row comes into the loop as a null on the first row. So this is going to be a null going into the function we're about to create. And it's going to pass in the first row index, which is 0, and the row array. And then it's going to do its magic, and it's going to create a row for us. And that result of this function is when this gets assigned. So it's after the row has been created. Once that happens, the instant this gets returned, this is now the second row, or, well, the first row as it's created. Now the row loop goes through it again, and now it's on the second index, the second member of the array, and now a row is going to remain the first row, even though we're creating the second row. And then this goes on for every row. We're passing in the previous row by reassigning the variable up here. So we took the variable out of the scope of the loop. If we said let row equal whatever inside of the loop, every iteration of the loop, it'll get rewritten over, which is not exactly what we want to do. So we want to put it out here, outside the scope of this loop. And now we're going to be creating the loops. So let's go ahead and make this function. And to do that, it's going to be outside of the maze generator function. So I'm just going to click the curly brace here and scroll down. And we're going to stick it right here. And once again, JavaScript reserved word function. And then we get to use the word we want to use for our function name. And then we're going to pass in what we decided up top. We're just going to call them the same things here. But mind you, up there it mattered what I called them because we were passing in actual values of something. This was the row index. This specifically is something. We pass it in here, but once it comes into the function, we can name it whatever we want. So we could say butter index here if we wanted to. But we're not going to do that. We're going to stay with our naming convention that we have. And this was the row array. And now we're just going to curly braces, open them up. Well, great. Now we have our function. Let's give it some logic. Now, to give it some logic, the easiest way we can do this here is in VS Code, we can open up a second window right here. We're going to, well, we didn't want to go that way, so let's see if we can close this here. We wanted to go to the right. So for some reason it went the other way. If I hold on to it, maybe. We're all discovering this together. So on the right, we have the same file open. And what we want to do is the create row is going to take care of this entire loop. So what we want to do is copy this entire loop. So we're going to start here at the bottom, and looks like we're going up. There we go. Now we're just going to do a cut. And there we go. We've removed it. And fortunately, we can still see it here. But I'm just going to go over to the left side. I'm going to tab into our function. It lets me do it. And I'm going to paste our code in there. Now I'm going to close this window over here to the right. And just to clean this up, you can see right here, this is indented a little bit too far from my liking. There we go. So we have the create row, and it needs to return something. So this is the first thing we want to do is actually get rid of column divs. We don't want this const anymore. So we're just going to go over here to the array. We're going to get rid of all this, and we're going to say return. And now, what do we want to return? Well, the first loop of this row is going to be null, if you remember that. And then the second and third and so on iterations, it's going to become the array of actual created items inside of that row. So we need this for the initial row, but after we make the initial row, we need the previous row. So this might make sense here in a second. Let's just open up here, and we're going to say const columns, because that's what's inside of the row, and we're going to say, hey, and I like to, I could just say row equal null, because that's our condition. If row equals null, but I like to surround mine in parentheses here, so let's just do that. So we're going to say if the row equals null, that's when we're going to do something special. And we're going to use a ternary operator here. And so if this condition is true, then it's always after the question mark. And if it's false, it's going to be after the colon. So all we have to do is put in the true value here and the false value here. And that's what gets assigned to columns. So if it's null, we need to use this here, right? So let's go over here and we'll say, oops. Let's just say we're going to go over here. Where are we going to? Right before the map. We're just going to cut that out. And instead, we're going to put, let's see if I got this right, columns. That's what we're going to put there. And I'm just going to open up another line here real quick. And let's get over to the question mark. And that's where we're going to put the array from. And again, if you recall from our other video where we went over what this does, is it's just going to end up being an array of undefines, however many the column is. In this case, columns is 8. So our initial row will be built by saying row equals null. Great, give us that. If not, give us the row that we're passing in here. So now we have a way to build this. We have columns map. Great, this is looking good right now. And let's see. Everything else looks good. We can actually move on. We've moved quite a bit of things around. So let's save our work. So notice I had the dot and that went away. And then let's load the view HTML in the browser to make sure that everything is working. And if something does not work right, just review the video up to this point and fix it. Now, before we go to the browser, let's do one last thing in our file here. And since we're going to return our create row, let's go back up here to where we're returning that. And just notice, besides these spaces, let's get rid of those. We're not using column divs anymore. So on line 36, or wherever that is in your file, column divs is now going to become row. So now let's do one more thing again. We're going to save our work, and now we can load the browser. Let's open the browser up. We're going to load our view HTML file, EZCODE maze, yep, right here. And we're going to hit open, and there we go. Our matrix is still there. That's all we're really checking to make sure it's still loading. Our console, there's our console log, and we don't have any errors. So, all right, that's good. Let's return back to our code.js file. And what we're going to do now is let's just review some of the logic that we know from the create row here. We know that the first row will be null, in which case when we run the columns map, this will be undefined at the first row. But after the first row, the column will actually be the columns that were built on the previous row. So we need a way to, let's see, go over this logic. So the first row will have all unique values. All right, we know that. It's going to have, just like our matrix, we're going to have our row and column indexes. And the second row will use the values from the first row. So let's start by setting the first row unique values. And if it's not the first row, then using the previous row's values. So to do that, we're going to just go right here above the inner HTML, because this is our unique value that we're going to be looking at. that we saw that we're displaying in our matrix. And we're just going to go ahead and create a new variable. It's a const, and we're going to call it set number, and it's going to be equal to, and here we're going to make a decision. There's going to be a decision tree here. So it's going to be, if you're the row is equal to null, once again, we're asking the question, if you're the first row, then we're going to do a question mark for our ternary, and the next value after the question mark is the true result. So if you are the first row, we're going to do right what we did right here. We're going to set this value. So let's just copy that up there and paste it. And then to get the ternary to the false statement, we're going to do a colon. And now we're going to say, well, give me the number that you already have. So who's that? Who's that already has the value? So we know in this loop we're creating a column div, which is a actual HTML element, but we want the previous one, and the previous one is going to be the column. And our row is equal to null is how we know this column is just the value undefined the first time. And so we're going to make a unique index, and we know if row is defined, then this column is actually the previous div, or at least the array of divs from the previous row, in which case we can do something different on it. We have an HTML element, so we can say, hey, column, because that's what we're calling the element right here. Not to be confused with the column div we're in right now. So we have this column, and we're going to get attribute, and we haven't set this attribute yet, but we're going to get it, and we're going to call it any attribute you set on an element. You can do custom attributes, and they have to be data hyphen, and then it has to be the word that you want. And of course, we're not going to use butter, but you could put butter there, data hyphen butter, whatever. In this case, we're going to say set. We're just going to call it the set number, and we're going to put a semicolon to end our statement there. So our ternary will result in either a unique number, which is the first true statement on the first row, or the previous row's data set, which means the next thing we have to do is apply the set number we just created. So we'll have to apply it to the actual div we're creating, which is right here. So we're going to go here, and we're going to say column div, because it's already been created there. And in this case, we're going to say, let's set the attribute. And when you're setting, we have two fields that we can put in there. One of them is, well, what attribute are you talking about? We're talking about the data set one. And what value are you talking about? We're talking about the set number from above. So if this is the first row, all we've done is create a new index and assign it to set number. Now we're going to take the element, the current element. So if this was the first row, this is going to be one of the columns of that row. And we're going to actually set an attribute, set a value on the HTML element itself. We're going to use that to store our values. And here it is, set number. So two things going on here. We're setting the set number here, which you won't see in the browser. And we're still setting it here in the browser so that we can look and see what happens. In fact, we can now get rid of this, and we can use set number, and we can see what that looks like in the browser. So we've made a few changes. Let's save our work. There's our unsaved icon, and now it's gone, it's saved. And now let's go to the browser, and here's our matrix, here's our IDs. Let's go ahead and refresh it. We've already loaded it. And note how the first number is now 0 for all rows. So our matrix, when we're looking at it, this used to be, let's just go back one. Oops, it's not going to let us go back here. But this was 0, 0. This was row 1, column 0, row 2, column 0, and so on. But what's going on here is, well, at least we know our set number code is working. We've seen a change here. So just a quick review on that. It's happening because we have some more logic to complete. So it goes through the first row and it sets the unique values. And then we're just applying the previous row's values once again. So we still have more logic to do, but that's why it's just copying the row from before, boom, 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 all the way down however many times, which is perfect. That's exactly where we want to be right now. So nice job, everyone. We've done a lot of code here, and we changed a bit of our code base to better reflect and be prepared to add some complex logic to our maze generator. In the next video, we'll attempt the next portion of the algorithm, the one that randomly adds the inner walls to the columns of each rows. If you've enjoyed this video, click like and then subscribe buttons to get notifications of new content. Thank you for exploring programming with me, and I'll see you in the next video.